You see, I'm an intergalactic bounty hunter, a lone wolf. I'm always in a new place, risking my life in the name of peace, but sometimes I wish I could stay on the same planet with the same person. Well, Samus, please call me Sammy. All right, Sammy. You don't need to save the galaxy from the scourge of the space pirates for me to love you. Oh, Arlo. Sammy. Ahem. Hey there! Well, my friends, Samus Returns comes out tomorrow, and I am nervous as all get out. I know you're probably thinking it's silly to be nervous about the release of a video game. There are so many other real things to be nervous about. Paying rent, public speaking engagements, economic turmoil, that rash on my back that keeps getting bigger. But for a gamer, the fate of a series they love can rank up there with the best of stressors. And right now, Metroid fans have every right to be nervous. Samus is on thin ice, and everyone agrees that the sales performance of Samus Returns is going to largely determine what happens to 2D Metroid in the future. Heck, Yoshio Sakamoto basically said as much. He wants to do more, but it all depends on how this game does. Now, we know that it's not the last shot for Metroid as a whole. This game could tank horribly, and Nintendo would continue to develop the previously announced Metroid Prime 4. If that were to happen, then Nintendo would probably conclude that it's 2D Metroid specifically that the gaming public just doesn't want badly enough anymore. Then after that, Metroid Prime 4 would really be the last shot. A failure there would mean that Metroid would probably be stuffed in the Big N's closet for another decade or so. But we're not talking about Prime 4 today, we're talking about Samus Returns and asking the question, how exactly does one support a series that they love? The obvious answer is buying the games, but it's a little more complicated than that. First though, let's talk numbers. Now, without knowing how much Nintendo spent on development and is currently spending on marketing and all that, it's impossible to know exactly how much the game needs to sell in order to make a decent profit and encourage future games in the same style. We've got to remember that turning any amount of profit at all does not automatically mean a successful game because of a thing called opportunity cost. A modest success can still be considered a failure because those resources could have gone toward making a game that could have potentially made more money. Maximizing profits per dollar spent is extremely important when you're a massive publicly traded company like Nintendo, versus a smaller developer who might just be happy selling enough to pay its employees so they can make a living doing what they love. If we've got to pick a number though, 1 million units sold sounds like a pretty good number across the board, at least for 3DS games. There are big companies that spend so much on a game that even 2 or 3 million units isn't quite enough. But a 2D platformer on such old tech can't be breaking the bank too badly. So maybe 1 million will be just fine. Let's say 1 million people need to pick up Samus Returns in order for Nintendo to consider it a good success. At this time, 67 million 3DSs have been sold. The initial assumption then is that only a small percentage of 3DS owners would have to buy the game to meet the 1 million unit goal, roughly in the ballpark of 1.4925373134328%. But not so fast. There are variables we need to take into account. We can't possibly have solid numbers for any of them, but they each take a chunk off the sales potential of that 67 million. First, that sales figure covers every iteration of the 3DS, and of course that includes folks who've bought multiple systems, whether to upgrade to a new model or simply for collecting purposes. I've only had the one 3DS myself, but from what I've heard, it sounds like there are a good number of people who fit into this multi-system category. Not a ton, but, you know, some. Then you gotta consider the fact that not every 3DS owner is a Metroid fan or even interested in this genre. That right there cuts the potential down most of all. I mean, even look at Pokémon, the most preposterously popular, wide-reaching sales behemoth on the system. Each generation of Pokémon on the 3DS has garnered around 15 million sales, and that's an incredibly good number. It's more money than Nintendo probably knows what to do with. And yet, 15 million, that's a relatively small percentage of 67 million. Something along the lines of 22.388059701493%. Gamers have a wide variety of tastes, basically, and Metroid fans only make up one small chunk of that range. After that, we can't forget that Metroid hasn't sold incredibly well in Japan historically. I couldn't exactly tell you why that is, but Japan makes up a large percentage of the gaming world, especially when it comes to Japanese-produced games. This right here is a pretty decent disadvantage when it comes to sales potential, and just something we have to hope isn't too much of a problem. Lastly, some might argue that the 3DS is old news. The Switch has busted down the door and will continue to sell out instantly into the holidays. On the plus side, only 5 million units have been sold, leaving a great deal of gamers with 3DSs and no Switches to divert their attention. But in the eyes of the public, the Switch is still stealing most of the spotlight. Outside of the very active and engaged gaming circles you see on social media and YouTube and all that, the Nintendo and Metroid fans, as it were, I honestly couldn't tell you if the game is getting a lot of press. And if it is, are people responding to it? Or are people looking at ads for Splatoon 2 and Breath of the Wild and then looking over at the ad for Samus Returns and being like, what is this? They're still making games for this? Even with so many 3DS owners out there, I'm just having a hard time gauging the demand for this game. I don't know if it will reach beyond the huddled masses of Metroid fans when the Switch is so shiny and new and attention-hogging. Maybe it will, but it's still something worth thinking about. So after all that, are we left with at least 1 million people who want to pick up the game? I don't know, man, but I certainly hope so. But let's get back to the topic of this video. How exactly does one most effectively support a series they love? What can we do to communicate to Nintendo that yes, the fans are here and this series is profitable? The answer is buying the game, but like I said earlier, it's not just buying the game, and in fact, buying a game for the wrong reasons can ultimately be damaging to a series. I know that sounds weird, but bear with me here. Imagine I make a video urging every one of my fans to buy a copy of Samus Returns, even if they don't think it looks like their cup of tea. Imagine this launches a big fan campaign and everybody is just begging anyone and everyone they can find to pick up a copy. Say this leads to a good number of people buying it, people who aren't too interested in Metroid but figure it looks okay and they're so caught up in the hype that they just want to help a game series out and by extension help out that series' fans. So the game ends up selling great, and Nintendo's like, alright, Metroid's back in business. And they make a new 2D Metroid in the same style, and they either put it on the 3DS or the Switch, or maybe even both. Well, what happens when those non-fans don't show up a second time? What happens when the fan campaigns are dissolved and the hype isn't as strong and the game fails to meet expectations set by the previous title? What then? This is a hard truth of video games that no one likes to hear, but not every series can support itself. I do indeed believe that Metroid can support itself if given a proper shot, but there's always that chance that I'm wrong, and no matter how awesome a 2D Metroid is, there just aren't enough people out there who want to buy it to make it worth Nintendo's time. Basically, I'm just saying it's important to let nature run its course. In the gaming world, it's survival of the fittest. There can be various factors that lead to a game's success or failure, but sometimes either the public wants a game series or it doesn't, and no amount of passion from the tiny vocal minority will change that. That's why no matter what series you're talking about, you should never buy a game unless you legitimately want to. Unless it is a game that you very much want to play, or if you're the adventurous type, a game that looks good enough to at least try, separately from all conversations of fans and failing franchises and all that. So, Arlo Mick won't get to the point, how do we support a series of games that we most definitely want to support because we legitimately love it and are not driven by any sort of pressure from other fans? Well, there are a few ways. Firstly, buy it at launch. As much as we hate to realize it sometimes, the importance of pleasing investors cannot be overstated. The people who own a lot of shares in Nintendo have at least some say in what goes on in the company. Money means influence. Good early sales of Samus Returns is going to make those investors happy, and they're going to want to see more Samus in the future. But even forgetting all them, good early sales are going to mean a lot to Nintendo themselves. Games take a lot of time to make, and the company's only got so much time and development talent to go around. Even when working with an outside studio, as they are on Samus Returns with Mercury Steam, they've got key staffers installed to oversee the project, and it all takes enough money and effort that they can only manage so many projects at any one time. This is why it's important to remember that 1 million sales in the first few weeks and sales that trickle in over time and eventually creep their way up to 1 million over the course of a year are not the same. Good early sales could mean all the difference in the next 2D Metroid, assuming there will be one, securing a development team and getting underway in a timely manner. Of course, this is Nintendo we're talking about. A game of theirs can sell awesomely, and sometimes that still doesn't mean they start working on another one right away, and they prefer to wait until they can come up with a new idea or something. But there's no denying that their confidence in the series is so important. So that means buying the game as close to launch as possible, and that of course goes hand in hand with buying the game at full price. I myself used to be a pretty big quite the frugal fellow when I was younger. I would just about always wait until a game was cheap before buying it, even if it was a game I really wanted. And Nintendo games are pretty great at just not going down in price, so the wait time was usually pretty long. What can I say? I needed to save my money for Magic cards. But if you really want to support a series, don't do this. Waiting for a sale might reduce the pressure on your wallet, but it ain't doing the game any favors. Sales numbers technically mean nothing without high profits. Now, I'm definitely not telling you that waiting for a price drop or a sale is inherently bad. You're going to do what works best for your financial situation, and again, survival of the fittest. Sometimes you want to wait for a sale simply because you don't want a game enough to pay full price, or you don't think it's worth full price. I get that completely. Right now we're just going over the best practices to maximize your support for a series in case that's something you want to do, which we must remind ourselves none of us as consumers are obligated to do. So right now we've got buy early to build confidence in the series and buy at full price to maximize profit for Nintendo. But if you want to go a step further, buy digital. And this one is big. If you've never thought about this sort of thing before, you'll be shocked to learn how little of your money acts as pure profit for the publisher when you go into the store and buy a game. First, it took money to manufacture and ship the game, then they had to sell the game to the retailer at a low enough price for the retailer to make a profit. Then if they didn't develop the game in-house, the developer gets a cut, then you've got to consider all the money they spent making and marketing the darn thing. When you buy a digital copy, assuming you didn't buy an eShop card from Best Buy or something, you cut out the retailer and the manufacturer entirely, and that is a significant bump to the profit a publisher earns on a game. Buying Samus Returns on the eShop maximizes your money spent and does the most good for the game's success. But let's say for a moment that going digital is just not an option. You just gotta have that plastic box on your shelf, you have a phobia of SD cards, whatever. The most humongously crucial thing to do here is buy the game new. I can't possibly stress this one enough. And while again, I'm not going to say that every person who buys a game used is doing something wrong, well, it's certainly getting into shady territory. Say I buy a game from GameStop for 60 bucks. The publisher makes money, GameStop makes a little more than they bought the game for. Then say I'm done with the game and I trade it in for 20 bucks. GameStop loses the money they made on the game in the first place. But then you come along and buy the game used. Sorry about the mustard stains. You spend something like $55, a whopping $5 less than full price, and guess how much GameStop makes? $55. Guess how much Nintendo makes? Zip, zilch, a big fat zero. Then imagine the same game is traded and sold 10 more times. That's a whole lot of people playing the game and a whole lot of money Nintendo does not get 1 penny of. Again, buying used isn't purely bad, but it's a gray area. Physical media lends itself well to being traded and bought and sold again. It's a product that you have, and it's our right as consumers to resell basically any product we've ever purchased. But if you're talking about doing the most good to support a game or series, which we are, then buying used is a great big no-no. The few dollars you save when you buy used is disproportionate to the amount of money the publisher doesn't gain. And it doesn't matter if it's from GameStop or Amazon or even your best bud. A used game sale benefits the seller and the seller only. Now, there's one more thing to talk about when it comes to throwing your money at a publisher, and that's extra stuff like DLC. Inflation means that $60 is worth a lot less now than it was 12 years ago, and games are only getting more pricey to produce, yada yada yada, so they want to make a few extra bucks with some extra content. In the same way, I won't say that buying a game new or digitally or right at launch is your moral obligation, personal preference be darned. I won't say that buying all the DLC you can get your hands on is always the right thing to do. There are obviously a lot of predatory companies out there that are selling their games piecemeal and trying to squeeze every penny they can out of their customers. You've got to look at every individual case and see if it's something you can get behind. Do I like spending 80 or 100 bucks on a game when all is said and done? No. In fact, if I'm honest, I'm more of a wait for the Game of the Year edition kind of guy. But if you're doing all you can to give a game your support, then, well, you know what the answer is here. Take Breath of the Wild as an example. You might remember me talking about the game's $20 expansion pass. We won't know if it offers a satisfying amount of content until the final chunk is released later this year, but I can entirely understand why Nintendo is trying to increase their return on the game. They don't often spend so much money on making a game that big and amazing, and they want to make sure such a thing is worth it for them. I picked up the pass because I want them to know that yes, I want big amazing games like Breath of the Wild, and it's also just plain awesome enough for me to want more to do in it. So where does that leave us with Samus Returns? There have been no DLC announcements per se, and frankly I don't exactly see such a thing happening, but the game does utilize Nintendo's own brand of plastic DLC. I'm talking of course about Amiibo, the new Samus and Metroid ones specifically. Sure, there's no way you're getting your hands on either of them without going to a scalper and paying through the nose, but just for the sake of conversation, assuming you are able to nab these, that's a lot of extra profit to send Nintendo's way. Sure, you could easily make the argument that buying these Amiibo doesn't tell Nintendo that Metroid is profitable, but that releasing special Amiibo next to any old game is profitable, but hey, that's why in the end it's up to you to decide. So those are all the ways you can potentially help out a game or a series that you want to see succeed. Beyond the actual spending of money, you've got concepts like social media and word of mouth and all that, though I'm not going to make any solid statements on that front. I do know that a game can potentially find a bigger audience if enough attention is drawn to it, but on the other hand, social media sometimes feels like a big echo chamber where hype doesn't necessarily equate to monetary success. Basically, there are just too many variables to consider, and at the end of the day, a cash register's ding speaks a lot louder than a hashtag. Don't get me wrong though, keep using the hashtags. It could very well make all the difference, and that kind of stuff is always worth doing, just, you know, buy the game too. Let's recap. If you want Samus Returns to succeed, what can you do? Buy the game at launch or as close to it as possible. Pay full price. Buy a digital copy, or barring that, buy a new physical copy. And if you really want to play it safe and go all out, hunt down some of those nifty Amiibo to go with your game. I hear the Metroid one is squishy. And remember that this applies to all games. Is there a certain unnamed exclusive third-party Switch game that you just happen to be thinking about at this very moment that you think deserves to become its own series and the success of which could potentially have an impact on future third-party development for the system? Maybe, by chance? Well then, you know exactly what to do. One last time, I'm never going to encourage you to buy a game that you didn't want to buy in the first place or to buy DLC that you don't think is worth the price. If everyone buys what they want to buy, then you get a market that knows exactly what people want to buy. Undesirable products don't make it. Desirable products do. But if you want to go that extra distance and help shape the industry, you've got the tools in front of you to show the big publishers exactly what you want. You can tell them in no uncertain terms that this is a game that you like, and that they should definitely make more games like this so that you may buy those games, making you happy, making the publisher happy, and most importantly, making Samus happy. Your time is coming, my sweet. They will love you again. Anyway. So the question of the day for you commenters, will you be picking up Samus Returns? If so, will you be getting it soon? Will you be getting it new or maybe digital? Will you be shelling out $80 to get that squishy Metroid amiibo? Don't do that, by the way. That was a joke. There's no question about the morality of buying from scalpers. It's wrong. Whatever the case, though, tomorrow I'm going to be blasting space dudes, and I can only hope that 999,999 other people are going to be doing the same. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to go lie in bed and worry about Metroid's fate until 2 in the morning.
Oh, Arlo, you're gonna single-handedly save Metroid with this video. You're so awesome and helpful and handsome.
Yeah, I know it.